The auctioneer's gavel came down like a death sentence, and Hannah Zimmerman felt her knees buckle as the crowd of rough men turned their eyes toward her like wolves circling wounded prey in the unforgiving Wyoming territory of 1883. Her father had gambled away everything they owned and then some, racking up debts to dangerous men in 3 counties before disappearing into the night like the coward he truly was. Now she stood on a makeshift platform in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Jackson, Wyoming, her wrists bound with rough hemp rope, her dark auburn hair falling loose around her shoulders because they had torn away the pins when they dragged her from her boarding house that morning. She was 21 years old and had never imagined her life would come to this, being sold like cattle to satisfy debts she had not incurred. "Gentlemen, we have here Miss Hannah Zimmerman," the auctioneer announced, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth and breath that reeked of whiskey. Young, healthy, can read and write. Her father owes Marcus Bellamy $1,500, and Mr. Bellamy has generously agreed to accept payment in the form of this here girl's indenture. Who will start the bidding? Hannah's stomach churned with nausea and rage. Marcus Bellamy stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed over his barrel chest, a cruel smile playing at his lips. He was the man who ran most of the gambling operations in Jackson and the surrounding settlements, and he was known for his ruthlessness. Men who crossed him ended up beaten or worse. She had heard stories of women who fell into his clutches, and none of those stories ended well. $500, called out a grizzled prospector missing most of his front teeth. 600, countered a cattle rancher with mean eyes and hands that looked like they had caused plenty of suffering. Hannah closed her eyes, praying for a miracle she did not believe would come. The voices rose and fell around her, men bidding on her future like she was nothing more than a horse or a piece of property. $1,500 was a fortune, more than most working men made in 2 years. She wondered who would be cruel enough or desperate enough to pay such a sum. $1,000, a new voice called out, deep and steady, cutting through the cacophony like a knife. The room fell silent. Hannah opened her eyes and searched for the speaker. He stood near the back door, partially shadowed, but she could make out broad shoulders, dark hair that touched his collar, and a weathered duster coat that had seen plenty of trail dust. He stepped forward into the lamplight, and she got her first clear look at him. He was younger than most of the men in the room, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong jawline covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a simple shirt, vest, and denims, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. Everything about him spoke of a man who lived by his own rules and answered to no one. "Vincent O'Sullivan," Marcus Bellamy said, his voice tinged with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you were up in Montana territory." "Plans changed," Vincent replied, his gaze never leaving Hannah. $1,000. "That's well short of what's owed," Bellamy growled. $1,500, another voice shouted, and Hannah's heart sank. It was the cattle rancher, the one with the mean eyes. Vincent's jaw tightened. $2,000, cash, right now. A collective gasp went through the room. $2,000 was an astounding sum, more than the debt her father owed. Hannah stared at this stranger who had just bid a small fortune for her indenture, trying to understand what kind of man would do such a thing. Was he worse than the others? Did he have plans for her that required such an investment? Bellamy's eyes narrowed with calculation. "That's a mighty generous offer, O'Sullivan. What's your interest in the girl?" "That's my business," Vincent said flatly. "Do we have a deal or not?" $2,000 settles her father's debt and then some. The room waited. Bellamy stroked his chin, clearly torn between the substantial profit and his curiosity about Vincent's motives. Finally, greed won out as it always did with men like him. "Sold," Bellamy declared. "The girl belongs to Vincent O'Sullivan." Hannah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Belongs to. Like she was a piece of furniture or a saddle. Vincent moved forward, pulling a leather pouch from inside his coat. He counted out the money in gold coins and bills, stacking them on the table with methodical precision. Bellamy counted it twice, a greedy smile spreading across his face. "Pleasure doing business with you, O'Sullivan," Bellamy said, extending his hand. Vincent ignored it. Instead, he walked directly to Hannah, drawing a knife from his belt. She flinched, but he simply cut through the ropes binding her wrists with one quick motion. The hemp fell away and she rubbed at the raw skin where it had chafed. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Yes," she managed, though her legs felt like water. "Then let's go." He placed a hand on her elbow, steadying her as she stepped down from the platform. The crowd of disappointed bidders parted before them, and Hannah kept her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to bear their stares. They emerged into the cool evening air of Jackson's Main Street. The sun had set behind the Teton Range, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Hannah gulped in deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. Vincent guided her toward a hitching post where a handsome chestnut gelding waited patiently. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" Vincent turned to face her fully, and in the fading light she could see his expression more clearly. There was no cruelty there, no lust or malice. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like sorrow. "I want nothing from you," he said quietly. "Your father's debt dies here today. You're free to go." Hannah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? You heard me. You're free. I just paid off your father's debt. It's settled. You don't owe Marcus Bellamy anything, and you don't owe me anything either." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch, pressing it into her hands. "There's $50 here. It should be enough to get you wherever you need to go. Stage leaves for Cheyenne tomorrow morning." She looked down at the pouch, then back up at his face, searching for the trap. Men did not spend $2,000 and then simply walk away. There had to be something he wanted, some price she would be expected to pay. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Vincent's expression darkened, and he looked away toward the mountains. "Let's just say I know what it's like to pay for someone else's sins. No one should be sold like property, especially not for debts they didn't incur. Your father made his choices. You shouldn't have to suffer for them." The conviction in his voice struck something deep in her chest. She had been prepared for cruelty, for degradation, for a future of servitude and worse. Instead, this stranger had freed her without asking for anything in return. It was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had experienced in the past terrible day, that she felt tears begin to slip down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you properly, but thank you," he nodded, turning back to his horse. "You should get off the street. Find somewhere safe to spend the night. Bellamy's men won't bother you now that the debt is settled, but Jackson isn't always kind to women on their own after dark." "Wait," she said as he prepared to mount. "Where will you go?" "I have business to attend to," he replied vaguely. "Don't worry about me." But something in Hannah rebelled at the idea of simply taking his money and walking away. This man had just saved her from a fate worse than death, had spent a fortune to free her without asking anything in return. The least she could do was learn his name properly, understand who he was. "Mr. O'Sullivan," she said, and he paused with one foot in the stirrup. "Would you let me buy you dinner? It's the least I can do. There's a respectable restaurant down the street, the Mountain View." They serve decent food and I have enough money now to pay for a meal." He turned back to her, surprise evident on his face. "That's not necessary." "I know it's not necessary, but I would like to. Please. Just one meal and then we can go our separate ways." For a long moment he simply looked at her, and she saw the internal debate playing out behind those storm-gray eyes. Finally, he lowered his foot back to the ground and nodded. "All right. One meal." The Mountain View restaurant was a simple establishment with rough-hewn wooden tables and checkered curtains in the windows, but it was clean, and the proprietor was a kindly woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who had always treated Hannah with respect during the 2 years she had lived in Jackson. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes widened when she saw Hannah enter with Vincent, but she had the grace not to ask questions. She simply showed them to a quiet table in the corner and promised to bring out the evening special. They sat across from each other, and for the first time, Hannah could really study the man who had saved her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the mark of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a working man. There was a weariness to him, a weight that spoke of hard experience and difficult choices. "How long have you been in Jackson?" she asked, trying to break the awkward silence. "Rode in this afternoon," he replied. "I was passing through on my way to Idaho Territory. Heard about the auction from some men at the livery stable. They were talking about it like it was entertainment." His jaw tightened with anger. "Made me sick. But you came anyway." "I came to stop it if I could." He met her eyes directly. "I couldn't live with myself if I had just ridden on and left you to that fate." Mrs. Fletcher arrived with 2 plates of beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee. The food smelled heavenly, and Hannah realized she had not eaten since the previous evening. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and she noticed that Vincent had the table manners of someone who had been raised properly, not the rough habits of a drifter. "Tell me about yourself," she said finally. "You know my story, or at least the worst parts of it. It seems only fair that I know something about you." He set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair. "Not much to tell. I'm a rancher, or I was. Had a spread up in Montana Territory, sold it a few months back." "Why?" "Needed a change." His tone suggested he would not elaborate further on that point. "I've been traveling since then, doing odd jobs, trying to figure out what comes next." "And you just happen to have $2,000? Hannah asked, unable to hide her skepticism. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "The ranch sold for a good price. I've been careful with the money." "That's still an enormous amount to spend on a stranger." "It's just money," he said quietly. "It can't buy back what really matters." There was a story there, something painful and deep, but Hannah did not press. Instead, she told him about her own life, how she had come to Jackson 2 years ago to work as a schoolteacher after her mother died, how her father had followed her here 6 months later, how his gambling had gradually destroyed everything. She found herself talking more than she had intended, the words spilling out in a rush as if a dam had broken. Vincent listened without interrupting, his full attention on her in a way that made her feel truly seen for the first time in months. Most people in Jackson had begun avoiding her once her father's debts became known, as if poverty and disgrace were contagious. But this stranger looked at her without judgment, without pity, just genuine interest and compassion. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said when she finally fell silent. "Sounds like your father put you in an impossible situation." "He's not a bad man," Hannah said, though the words felt hollow. "He's just weak. Gambling became like a disease for him after my mother died. He couldn't stop himself." "That doesn't excuse what he did," Vincent replied firmly. "Doesn't excuse him running and leaving you to face the consequences alone." Hannah could not argue with that. The betrayal of her father's abandonment still burned in her chest like hot coals. She had been alone in her boarding house room when Bellamy's men had come for her, had begged them to give her time to find her father, but they had laughed and said they knew exactly where he was, fled like a coward to parts unknown. "What will you do now?" Vincent asked. "Where will you go?" It was the question that had been haunting her all day. She had no family left except for a distant aunt in Philadelphia, whom she had never met. Her teaching position had been lost the moment her father's debts became public knowledge. The boarding house would not take her back without payment, and $50 would not last long. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose I'll take the stage to Cheyenne like you suggested. Maybe I can find work there, start over where no one knows my story." Vincent nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested he was not satisfied with that answer. They finished their meal, and when Mrs. Fletcher brought the bill, Vincent insisted on paying despite Hannah's protests. "You'll need every dollar of that 50, he said. "Don't waste it on me." They stepped back out into the night. The street had grown quiet, most people having retreated to the saloons or their homes. A cool breeze blew down from the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Hannah shivered in her thin dress, the only decent garment she still owned. "You'll need a place to stay tonight," Vincent observed. "The boarding house won't take you back, not without payment, and I'd rather not spend the money if I'm leaving tomorrow." He considered this for a moment. "I've got a room at the hotel. It has 2 beds. You can take one, and I'll sleep in the chair. It's not proper, but it's better than you spending the night on the street." Everything about this man continued to surprise her. "You would do that?" "I've already spent $2,000 to keep you out of the hands of dangerous men. Seems foolish to let you get into trouble now." His tone was dry, almost amused. "Besides, like I said, it has 2 beds. I'll be a perfect gentleman." Hannah knew she should refuse, knew that accepting such an offer could damage what little remained of her reputation. But the practical part of her mind pointed out that her reputation was already in tatters, and Vincent O'Sullivan had proven himself trustworthy in ways that few men ever would. More than that, she found she did not want to say goodbye to him just yet. There was something about his presence that made her feel safe for the first time in months. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." The hotel was modest but clean, and the clerk gave them a knowing look that made Hannah's cheeks burn with embarrassment. Vincent ignored it completely, taking the key and leading her up the narrow stairs to a room on the 2nd floor. True to his word, the room contained 2 simple beds separated by a small nightstand, plus a wooden chair near the window. "You take whichever bed you want," he said, setting his saddlebags down. "I'm going to go check on my horse, make sure he's settled for the night. I'll be back in about 20 minutes. That should give you time to get ready for sleep." He left before she could respond, and Hannah stood in the middle of the room, overwhelmed by the strangeness of the day. This morning, she had been facing a nightmare, and now she was standing in a hotel room that had been paid for by a mysterious cowboy who seemed to want nothing from her, except the satisfaction of having done the right thing. She washed her face in the basin on the dresser, braided her hair, and changed into the simple nightgown she had been wearing under her dress, all that Bellamy's men had allowed her to grab when they came for her. She climbed into the bed furthest from the door and pulled the blankets up to her chin, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Vincent returned as promised, moving quietly into the room. He saw that she had already gone to bed and nodded in approval. He removed his gun belt, hanging it on the back of the chair, then his boots. But instead of settling into the chair as he had said, he lay down on top of the other bed, still fully clothed, his hands folded behind his head. "You don't have to sleep in the chair," Hannah said softly. "The bed is more comfortable. "This is fine," he replied. "Get some rest. Morning comes early." But Hannah found she could not sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind kept churning over the events of the day, and eventually she spoke into the darkness. "Vincent?" "Yes." "Why did you really do it? The truth?" There was a long silence, and she thought perhaps he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I had a sister once, younger than me by 3 years. Our father was a drunk who beat our mother and gambled away everything we had. When I was 20 and she was 17, he sold her to a man who ran a brothel in Abilene. Said it would settle his debts." Vincent's voice was flat, emotionless, but Hannah could hear the pain beneath. "I was working a cattle drive in Texas when it happened. By the time I got back and found out, she had been gone for 2 months. I tracked her down, but when I found her, she barely recognized me. What they had done to her in those 2 months had broken something inside. She couldn't even look at me without flinching." Hannah's heart clenched with sympathy and horror. "Oh, Vincent." "I killed the man who owned the brothel," he continued. "Put a bullet right between his eyes. Then I took my sister and we ran. Went up to Montana Territory where no one knew us. I worked every job I could find, saved every penny, and bought a small ranch. She lived with me there for 3 years, and slowly she started to heal. Started to smile again, to talk about maybe finding a good man someday and having a normal life." "What happened?" Hannah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Pneumonia took her last winter. She was always fragile after what happened to her. I buried her on a hillside overlooking the valley, and after that, I couldn't stay there anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw her. So I sold the ranch and started traveling." He paused. "When I heard those men in the livery stable talking about the auction, talking about you like you were a piece of meat, it was like hearing about my sister all over again. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't save her, but I could save you." Tears streamed down Hannah's face in the darkness. She understood now, understood the pain and guilt that drove him, the weight he carried. He had not saved her out of noble principle alone, but out of desperate need to redeem a failure that haunted him. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry about your sister." "Her name was Margaret," Vincent said quietly. "She loved flowers. Used to pick wildflowers and put them all over the house. Said they made everything brighter. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was. She deserved better than what life gave her. Better than what our father did to her, better than what I failed to prevent." "You couldn't have known," Hannah said firmly. "You were away working. You can't blame yourself for something you had no control over." "I know that in my head," Vincent replied, "but my heart tells me a different story. If I had been there, if I had stayed home instead of going on that drive, maybe I could have stopped him. Maybe she would still be alive." Hannah wanted to comfort him, to ease the burden of guilt he clearly carried, but she knew that some wounds went too deep for words to heal. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me with that. Get some sleep, Hannah. Tomorrow you start your new life." But as Hannah finally drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking that she did not want to say goodbye to Vincent O'Sullivan. She did not want to get on that stage to Cheyenne and never see him again. Something had shifted between them in the darkness of that hotel room, a connection forged through shared pain and unexpected kindness. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of Vincent moving around the room. He was already dressed, his gear packed, his gun belt back in place. "Morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "I brought up some breakfast from the restaurant downstairs. Coffee, biscuits, and eggs. Figured you would be hungry." Hannah sat up, grateful that she had slept in her dress after all. The food smelled delicious, and they ate together in companionable silence. When they finished, Vincent gathered his things and prepared to leave. "The stage to Cheyenne leaves at 10 o'clock, he said. You've got about an hour. Will you be all right from here? This was it, Hannah realized. This was goodbye. In a few minutes, Vincent O'Sullivan would walk out that door and she would never see him again. He would go on to Idaho Territory, or wherever his wandering took him, and she would go to Cheyenne to try to build a new life. It was the sensible thing, the practical thing. But Hannah had spent her whole life being sensible and practical, and where had it gotten her? Her father's gambling had destroyed any security she had built. The people of Jackson, whom she had taught and helped for 2 years, had turned their backs on her the moment scandal touched her name. She had played by all the rules and ended up nearly sold into slavery. Maybe it was time to take a risk on something that felt right instead of something that made sense. What if I didn't take the stage to Cheyenne? She asked, her heart pounding. Vincent paused with his hand on the doorknob. What do you mean? What if I came with you instead? To Idaho Territory, or wherever you're going. The words tumbled out in a rush. I could cook, clean, help with whatever work you find. I wouldn't be a burden, I promise. I'm strong and I'm not afraid of hard work. He turned to face her fully and she could not read his expression. Hannah, you don't know me. You don't know anything about the kind of life I lead. It's not stable, not safe. I don't even know where I'll be in a month. I know you're a good man, she said firmly. I know you paid $2,000 to free someone you had never met. I know you trusted me with the story about your sister. I know you've been nothing but respectful and kind. That's more than I can say about most people I've known for years. That's not enough basis for making a decision like this, Vincent argued, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the war between what he thought he should say and what he wanted to say. Maybe not, Hannah agreed. But what's my alternative? Go to Cheyenne where I know no one and hope I can find decent work with no references. Try to explain to potential employers why I left Jackson in disgrace. At least with you, I know I would be safe. At least with you, I wouldn't be alone. Vincent ran a hand through his dark hair, clearly struggling with the decision. If you came with me, people would talk. They would assume things about us that aren't true. Your reputation would be completely destroyed. My reputation is already destroyed, Hannah pointed out. Everyone in Jackson knows what happened, and I don't care what strangers in other towns think. I care about surviving, about finding a place where I belong. I felt more at home talking with you last night than I have in months. Doesn't that count for something? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant when his resolve crumbled. You're sure about this? Once we leave Jackson together, there's no going back. People will make assumptions, and I can't control what they think or say. I'm sure, Hannah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. Vincent nodded slowly. All right, then. But we do this right. We'll find a justice of the peace or a preacher. Get married properly before we leave town. That way, there's no question about propriety, no room for the kind of gossip that could follow us. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. You want to marry me? If you're going to travel with me, if you're going to tie your future to mine, then we do it legal and proper, Vincent said firmly. I won't have you living under a cloud of scandal because of me. Besides, if we're married, you'll have legal protection. No one can claim you're indentured or try to collect your father's other debts through you. It was absurdly practical and completely insane at the same time. They had known each other for less than 24 hours. She did not know his favorite food or how he took his coffee or what made him laugh. But she knew the most important things. She knew he was honorable, brave, and capable of profound kindness. She knew that her heart lifted when she looked at him, and that the thought of never seeing him again felt like a physical pain. All right, she said. Let's get married. They found a circuit preacher having breakfast at the Mountain View restaurant. Reverend Thomas was an elderly man who had been traveling the Wyoming Territory for 30 years performing weddings, baptisms, and funerals wherever he was needed. He agreed to marry them for $5, asking no questions about the speed of the courtship. In the Wild West, quick marriages were not uncommon, especially when practical considerations outweighed romantic ones. Mrs. Fletcher and her husband served as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the restaurant's small back room with no flowers, no music, no celebration. Vincent spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice, and Hannah repeated hers with her hands trembling in his. Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, and Vincent kissed her gently on the forehead, a chaste touch that somehow felt more intimate than anything that had come before. They signed the marriage certificate, and Vincent tucked it carefully into his saddlebag. Mrs. Fletcher hugged Hannah and wished them well, tears in her kind eyes. Within an hour of making the decision, Hannah Zimmerman had become Hannah O'Sullivan, wife of a man she barely knew, about to ride off into an uncertain future. Vincent helped her onto his horse, and she settled into the saddle in front of him. It was improper for them to ride double like this, but they had only one horse and would need to remedy that situation once they reached the next town. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and Hannah felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back. They rode out of Jackson as the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, heading west toward Idaho Territory. Hannah did not look back at the town that had been her home for 2 years. She kept her eyes fixed on the mountains ahead, on the future that awaited her with this quiet, complicated man who had saved her life. They traveled for most of the day, stopping only to water the horse and rest briefly. Vincent was not much of a talker, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. As evening approached, they made camp near a stream, and Vincent showed Hannah how to properly build a fire and prepare a simple meal of salt pork and beans. "Tomorrow we'll reach a trading post," he said as they ate. "We can get you proper riding clothes, another horse, supplies for the trail. The money I gave you last night should cover most of it." "I don't need charity," Hannah said quietly. "It's not charity. You're my wife now, and a wife needs proper equipment." He paused. "Besides, that money is as much yours as mine. We're partners in this, Hannah. Everything I have is yours, too." The word wife still felt strange on her tongue, but not unpleasant. "What exactly are we partners in?" "You said you sold your ranch. What's your plan now?" Vincent gazed into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I heard about opportunities in Idaho Territory. There's a valley near a town called Salmon where they're looking for ranchers willing to work the land. It's hard country, but the territorial government is offering good terms for people willing to settle there. I thought I might take a look, see if it's somewhere I could build something new." "And now I'm still going to take a look," he said, meeting her eyes. "But if we settle there, it won't just be my ranch. It will be ours. We'll build it together." The idea sent a thrill through Hannah's chest. For the first time in months, she had something to look forward to instead of dread. "I've never ranched before. I don't know the first thing about cattle or horses." "You'll learn," Vincent said confidently. "You're smart and you're not afraid of hard work. That's more important than experience." They talked late into the night, and Hannah learned more about the man she had married. He told her about growing up in Kansas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the years he had spent driving cattle up from Texas to the railheads in Kansas and Nebraska. He spoke about the ranch he had built in Montana, the struggles and the victories, the satisfaction of creating something from nothing. In turn, Hannah told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her mother who had been a teacher and had passed that love of education on to her daughter, about the small schoolhouse in Jackson and the children she had taught. She spoke about her dreams of making a difference, of helping young minds grow and develop. "You could still teach," Vincent said thoughtfully. "If we settle near Salmon, there will be children who need education. You could start a school." The possibility had not occurred to her, but once he said it, Hannah could see it clearly. A small schoolhouse in Idaho Territory, children of ranchers and miners learning to read and write, a community coming together. It was a beautiful vision. When they finally bedded down for the night, Vincent laid out his bedroll on one side of the fire and gave Hannah his extra blanket for the other side. They were married now, but he clearly intended to give her time to adjust before expecting anything more than companionship. Hannah appreciated his consideration, even as part of her wondered what it would be like to truly be his wife in every sense. The next few days fell into a comfortable pattern. They rose with the sun, traveled until late afternoon, made camp, and talked through the evening. Vincent taught her how to properly saddle a horse, how to read trail signs, how to cook over an open fire. Hannah shared stories from her teaching days and asked endless questions about ranching and cattle and the land they were traveling through. At the trading post, Vincent bought her sturdy riding clothes, a pair of good boots, a warm coat, and a gentle mare named Rosie who had a sweet temperament. He also purchased supplies for the trail and a rifle, which he insisted on teaching Hannah to use. "A woman traveling in this country needs to know how to protect herself," he said as he showed her how to load and aim the weapon. "I'll be with you most of the time, but you should never be helpless." Hannah proved to be a decent shot after some practice, and she appreciated Vincent's matter-of-fact approach to her education. He never condescended to her or treated her as less capable because she was a woman. He simply taught her what she needed to know and trusted her to learn. As the days passed and they drew closer to Idaho Territory, Hannah found herself falling in love with both the land and the man beside her. The mountains were breathtaking, the valleys lush with grass and wildflowers. Vincent pointed out wildlife and shared the names of plants and trees, teaching her to read the landscape the way he did. And Vincent himself continued to surprise her. He was unfailingly patient with her questions, quick to help when she struggled with some new skill, and gentle in ways that contrasted sharply with his rough exterior. He made her laugh with dry observations about the mules at the trading post or the pompous merchant who tried to overcharge them for supplies. He shared his coffee without complaint when she forgot to pack her own cup one morning. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders when the mountain nights grew cold. She began to notice small things about him. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused, the scar on his left hand from a rope burn. The habit he had of checking the horizon constantly, always aware of his surroundings. The gentleness with which he handled the horses. 3 weeks into their journey, they made camp near a particularly beautiful spot where a waterfall cascaded into a clear pool. Hannah had been riding all day and felt dusty and tired. The water looked incredibly inviting. "I'm going to wash," she announced, gathering soap and a clean shirt from her saddlebag. "I'll check the snares I set earlier, give you privacy," Vincent said immediately, turning away. Hannah walked to the edge of the pool, then paused. They had been married for 3 weeks, traveling together day and night, and Vincent had been nothing but respectful. He had not pushed her, had not demanded his rights as a husband, but she was tired of sleeping on opposite sides of the fire. She was tired of the careful distance he maintained. She wanted more, and she was not sure how to tell him. "Vincent," she called, and he turned back. "You don't have to leave, we're married. It's not improper for you to be here." He looked uncertain. "Hannah, I don't want you to feel pressured. I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement. I'm content to let things develop naturally, at whatever pace you're comfortable with." She walked back to him, her heart pounding with nervousness and determination. What if I'm comfortable with more? What if I want this to be a real marriage? His eyes darkened with emotion. Are you sure? We don't have to rush anything. I'm sure, Hannah said softly. I've been sure for days now. I just didn't know how to tell you. Vincent reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. I need you to understand something. When I married you, it wasn't just about protecting your reputation or giving you legal status. From the moment I saw you on that platform, something in me recognized something in you. I don't believe in love at first sight, but I believe in knowing when something is right. And this, you and me together, this feels right. It does, Hannah agreed, her voice barely a whisper. He kissed her then, not the chaste touch of their wedding day, but a real kiss, deep and searching and full of all the feeling that had been building between them for weeks. Hannah responded with equal passion, her arms going around his neck, her fingers threading through his dark hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about this properly, make sure we're both understanding what we want. I want you, Hannah said clearly. I want this marriage to be real in every way. I want to build a life with you, a home, maybe a family someday. I want to fall asleep next to you and wake up in your arms. I'm not afraid anymore, Vincent. I know this is right. The smile that spread across his face was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, transforming his usually serious expression into something almost boyish. I want all of that too, more than I can properly put into words. They spent that evening by the waterfall, talking about their hopes and dreams, making plans for the future they would build together. When night fell, Vincent laid out their bedrolls side by side instead of across the fire from each other. They lay together under the stars, Hannah's head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, and for the first time since her father's betrayal, she felt completely safe and loved. The next morning, everything had changed between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by casual touches and warm glances. Vincent helped Hannah onto her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. She leaned over to kiss his cheek before they started riding, making him grin. They talked more easily, laughed more freely, existed in the comfortable intimacy of a couple truly in love. As they crossed into Idaho territory and made their way toward the town of Salmon, Hannah felt a sense of excitement building. This was their future, their chance to create something beautiful together. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, was behind them. Ahead lay only possibility. Salmon turned out to be a small but growing community nestled in a valley between towering mountains. The main street had a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a blacksmith, and a church. The people they met were friendly, if curious about the newcomers. Vincent inquired about the land grants he had heard about and was directed to the territorial office. The land agent was a middle-aged man named Mr. Whitmore, who explained that the government was indeed offering favorable terms to settlers willing to work the land in the valley north of town. For a minimal fee and the promise to improve the property, they could claim a substantial parcel. "It's hard country," Whitmore warned. "The winters are brutal and you'll be fairly isolated from town. But the soil is good, there's plenty of water from the river, and the grazing is excellent for cattle. Are you experienced ranchers?" "I ran a successful spread in Montana Territory for 5 years," Vincent replied. "I know what I'm doing." "And you, Mrs. O'Sullivan?" Whitmore asked Hannah. "I'm a teacher," she said confidently, "but I'm a quick learner and I'm not afraid of hard work. Plus, I imagine there are children in this area who could benefit from education." Whitmore's face brightened. "Actually, that's a real need. We have families scattered throughout the valley and no school to speak of. The parents have been talking about pooling resources to hire a teacher. If you're interested, I can put you in touch with them." Hannah and Vincent exchanged excited glances. Everything was falling into place even better than they had hoped. By the end of the afternoon, they had filed their claim on a beautiful piece of land along the river, met with several families who were enthusiastic about Hannah starting a school, and made arrangements to purchase supplies in town. The land they had claimed was breathtaking. Rolling meadows perfect for grazing, stands of pine and aspen, the river running clear and cold through the center of the property. There was even a small cabin already on the land, built by a previous settler who had given up and moved on. It was rough and would need work, but it was shelter, a place to start. That first night in their own home, even though it was just a one-room cabin with a dirt floor and gaps in the walls, felt magical. Vincent built a fire in the stone hearth, and they made dinner together, working side by side in the small space. After they ate, Vincent pulled Hannah into his arms and danced with her slowly to music only they could hear. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Sullivan," he murmured against her hair. "Welcome home, Mr. O'Sullivan," she replied, her heart full to overflowing with joy. They spent the next several months working from sunup to sundown to turn their property into a functioning ranch. Vincent repaired the cabin, plugging the gaps in the walls, building a proper wooden floor, adding a second room that would serve as their bedroom. Hannah planted a vegetable garden, learning through trial and error how to coax food from the Idaho soil. Together they built a barn, fences, and a chicken coop. Vincent rode into town and purchased a small herd of cattle, 20 head to start. It was not much, but it was a beginning. He also bought several horses, including a beautiful stallion he planned to use for breeding. Hannah marveled at his knowledge and skill with the animals, the way he could read their behavior and respond with perfect timing. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit on the porch Vincent had built and watch the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked about their plans for expanding the herd or which crops to plant next spring. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, Hannah's hand in Vincent's, grateful for the life they were building. The families from the valley brought their children to meet Hannah, and she was delighted to find that she would have 12 students ranging in age from 5 to 14. The parents agreed to help build a small schoolhouse on a central piece of land, and the men of the valley came together for a raising in late October. In one long day of communal effort, a one-room schoolhouse took shape, complete with a wood stove, benches for the students, and a blackboard Vincent had ordered from a catalog. Hannah's first day as a teacher in her new school was one of the happiest of her life. The children were eager to learn, the parents supportive, and she felt the deep satisfaction of doing work that mattered. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography, using every skill her mother had taught her and everything she had learned in Jackson. Vincent was incredibly proud of her, bragging to anyone who would listen about his wife, the teacher. He made sure she had all the supplies she needed, riding into town to purchase books, slates, chalk, and paper. He built her a desk for the schoolhouse and shelves for books. He even carved her a wooden sign that read, "Salmon Valley School, Mrs. Hannah O'Sullivan, Teacher," and hung it above the door. Winter arrived with the fierce intensity that Mr. Whitmore had warned them about. Snow piled up several feet deep, and the temperature plummeted far below zero. But Vincent had prepared well, laying in supplies and hay for the animals. The cabin was snug and warm, and Hannah discovered that she loved the enforced intimacy of being snowed in with her husband. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other from the books Hannah had ordered, playing cards and talking about everything and nothing. Vincent taught her to play chess, and Hannah proved to be a fierce competitor. They made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside, discovering each other slowly and completely. One evening in January, as they sat together with Hannah nestled against Vincent's side, she spoke the words that had been building inside her for weeks. "I love you," she said simply. "I know we married out of necessity and practicality, but somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you." Vincent tightened his arms around her, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too, Hannah. I think I started falling for you that first night in the hotel room when you cried for my sister, even though you had just been through hell yourself. You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known." "We're quite a pair," Hannah said with a soft laugh. "Two broken people who somehow managed to find each other and build something beautiful." "Not broken," Vincent corrected gently. "Scarred, maybe, but not broken. We've both survived things that would have destroyed weaker people, and we came out stronger on the other side." Spring arrived like a benediction, the snow melting to reveal green grass and wildflowers. Hannah thought of Vincent's sister Margaret, who had loved flowers, and she gathered armfuls of them to fill the cabin. Vincent noticed and understood, his eyes growing suspiciously bright when he saw the cheerful blooms brightening every surface. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "Margaret would have been happy to know that I found someone like you." "I wish I could have known her," Hannah replied. "She gave you so much of your kindness and compassion. I can see her influence in everything you do." The cattle herd grew as calves were born, and Vincent hired a young man named Thomas to help with the ranch work. Thomas was 18, hardworking, and grateful for steady employment. He built himself a small bunk in the barn and became like a younger brother to both Vincent and Hannah. The school year ended successfully, and Hannah was asked to return the following fall. Several families expressed interest in sending their children to her, even if it meant a long ride to the schoolhouse. Her reputation as an excellent teacher was growing throughout the valley. In June, Hannah realized she had missed her monthly cycle. At first, she thought it was simply stress or the change in seasons, but when a second month passed with the same result, she began to suspect the truth. She rode into town to see the doctor's wife, Mrs. Patterson, who served as the midwife for the area. Mrs. Patterson confirmed what Hannah had begun to hope. She was pregnant, due in late January or early February. Hannah rode home in a daze of joy and terror, wondering how Vincent would react to the news. She told him that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his face unreadable. Then a slow, beautiful smile spread across his features, and he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the corral. He picked Hannah up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "We're going to have a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We're going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, though the answer was obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Vincent said, setting her down gently and cupping her face in his hands. "You've given me everything, Hannah. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I never thought I would have any of this again after Margaret died, but you brought light back into my life." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about names and preparing the cabin for a baby. Vincent became almost comically protective, insisting that Hannah should not lift anything heavy or overexert herself. She rolled her eyes at his hovering but secretly loved his attentiveness. The summer passed in a blur of preparations. Vincent built a beautiful wooden cradle, spending hours sanding it smooth so no rough edges would harm delicate baby skin. Hannah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. The women from the valley threw her a party, bringing gifts and advice and sharing stories of their own pregnancies and births. As autumn arrived and Hannah's belly grew round, Vincent insisted she should not teach that fall. But Hannah was determined, and they compromised. She would teach until December, and one of the older girls would help with any heavy lifting or strenuous tasks. The school year started well, but in mid-November, Hannah received news that shattered the peaceful world they had built. A letter arrived from a lawyer in Cheyenne, informing her that her father had been found dead in a boarding house, apparently from heart failure. He had left no assets, only more debts. The lawyer wanted to know if Hannah would be responsible for burial expenses. Hannah read the letter 3 times, feeling numb. Her father was dead. The man who had gambled away everything, who had abandoned her to face his creditors alone, who had set in motion the chain of events that had nearly destroyed her life. She should feel something, she thought. Grief or anger or relief or anything. Instead, she just felt empty. Vincent found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in her hand, tears streaming silently down her face. He read the letter over her shoulder, then pulled her gently into his arms. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know he hurt you terribly, but he was still your father. It's all right to grieve." "I don't know what I'm feeling," Hannah admitted. "Part of me still loves him because he's my father and he wasn't always terrible. He used to read to me when I was little, used to make me laugh. But he also betrayed me in the worst possible way. He sold me to save himself. How do I reconcile those 2 versions of him?" "You don't have to," Vincent said gently. "People are complicated. Your father could be both the man who loved you and read to you and the man who made terrible choices out of weakness and selfishness. Both things can be true. You can mourn the good parts while acknowledging the bad." They sent money to the lawyer to cover burial expenses, more than was necessary because Vincent insisted that whatever her father had done, he should have a decent burial. Hannah appreciated the gesture, appreciated Vincent's understanding that despite everything, she needed to do right by her father's memory. As December arrived, and Hannah grew larger and more uncomfortable, she finally agreed to stop teaching until after the baby was born. The families were understanding, and one of the mothers who had been a teacher before marrying agreed to fill in until Hannah could return. Christmas was quiet and beautiful. Vincent brought home a small pine tree, and Hannah decorated it with strings of berries and paper ornaments her students had made. They exchanged simple gifts. Vincent gave Hannah a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, soft wool in a deep blue that matched her eyes. Hannah gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, embroidered with his initials on the cuff. On Christmas night, they sat together by the fire, Hannah's hands resting on her swollen belly where the baby kicked and tumbled. Vincent kept his hand there too, his face filled with wonder every time he felt movement. "This time last year I was alone and aimless," he said softly. "I had money but no purpose, freedom but no direction. I thought I would just wander until something made sense again. And now," Hannah prompted, "now I have everything that matters. You, this ranch, a baby on the way. I have a reason to get up every morning and work hard. I have something worth protecting and building for." He kissed her temple gently. "You saved me, Hannah, just as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," she corrected. "We both needed someone to believe in us, someone to build a future with." The baby arrived on a freezing night in early February during a howling snowstorm. Mrs. Patterson made it to the cabin just before the roads became completely impassable, thank goodness. Vincent paced the main room while Hannah labored in their bedroom, forbidden from entering by the midwife's strict orders. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Vincent was going out of his mind with worry, especially when he heard Hannah cry out in pain. But finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the lusty wail of a newborn baby filled the cabin. Mrs. Patterson emerged with a smile. "You have a healthy daughter, Mr. O'Sullivan. Mother and baby are both doing fine." Vincent practically ran into the bedroom, his heart in his throat. Hannah lay propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet our daughter," she said softly. Vincent approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Hannah pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny, perfect face with wisps of dark hair and impossibly small features. The baby's eyes were closed, but even in sleep, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Can I hold her?" he asked, his voice breaking. Hannah carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support her head. Vincent cradled his daughter with infinite gentleness, staring down at her in complete awe. This tiny person was his, created from his love for Hannah. She represented everything good and hopeful about their future. "What should we name her?" Hannah asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his daughter's peaceful face, Vincent knew exactly what her name should be. "Margaret," he said quietly. "If that's all right with you, I want to name her after my sister so that something beautiful carries on her name." Hannah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "That's perfect. Margaret Hannah O'Sullivan." Little Margaret proved to be a relatively easy baby, much to her parents' relief. She nursed well, slept in reasonable stretches, and had a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her fall in love with her. Vincent was a devoted father, walking the floor with her when she fussed, changing her diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching her sleep in the beautiful cradle he had made. As spring arrived and Margaret grew stronger, Hannah began to feel restless to return to teaching. Vincent supported her desire to work but worried about her taking on too much too soon. They worked out a compromise. Hannah would teach 3 days a week, and on those days, Thomas's mother, Mrs. Klein, who lived nearby, would come to the ranch to watch Margaret. The other 2 school days, one of the older students would teach the younger children with Hannah's lesson plans. It worked beautifully. Hannah loved being back in the schoolhouse, and she also loved the days she spent at home with her daughter. Margaret thrived with the attention from both parents and the kindly Mrs. Klein. Vincent continued to build the ranch, expanding the herd and improving the property. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable and happy. That summer, they received an unexpected visitor. A U.S. Marshal arrived at the ranch looking for Vincent O'Sullivan. Hannah's heart jumped into her throat, fearing that someone had discovered Vincent's killing of the brothel owner back in Kansas years ago. But the marshal's business was different. "I'm tracking a man named Richard Zimmerman," the marshal said. "He ran out on debts and obligations in Wyoming territory. His daughter was sold to settle those debts, but I heard that situation got resolved. I figured you folks might know where he ended up." "He's dead," Hannah said quietly. "Died last November in Cheyenne. Heart failure, according to the letter we received." The marshal nodded, making a note in his book. "That closes that case then. Sorry for your loss, Mrs. O'Sullivan." After he left, Hannah realized that the news of her father's death being official somehow brought closure. That chapter of her life was truly over. Her father's sins had been paid for, not by her suffering, but by Vincent's generosity and the life they had built together. As the years passed, the O'Sullivan Ranch prospered. The herd grew to over 100 head of cattle, and Vincent's horse breeding program began producing animals that were sought after throughout Idaho territory and beyond. Hannah's school became a fixture in the valley, and she gained a reputation as one of the finest teachers in the region. Margaret grew into a bright, curious child with her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's auburn hair. She was fearless and adventurous, constantly getting into scrapes that gave her parents gray hairs but also made them laugh. Vincent taught her to ride almost as soon as she could walk, and she took to it like she had been born in the saddle. When Margaret was 3, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1887 they welcomed a son they named James Vincent O'Sullivan. James was quieter than his sister, more contemplative, but equally beloved. 2 years later, another daughter arrived whom they named Lily Rose. And 2 years after that, a final son, Samuel. Their family was complete, the cabin that had once seemed adequate now bursting at the seams with life and love and noise. Vincent and Thomas expanded the original cabin into a proper house, adding rooms and a real second floor. It was not fancy by any means, but it was solid and comfortable, filled with handmade furniture and the laughter of children. Hannah planted flowers all around the porch, creating a riot of color in the summer months, a tribute to the sister Vincent had lost and the love that had bloomed between them. The children all attended their mother's school, which had expanded into a larger building as more families settled in the valley. Margaret showed signs of becoming a teacher herself someday, patient with the younger children and eager to help with lessons. James was fascinated by the cattle and horses, clearly destined to be a rancher like his father. Lily had inherited Hannah's love of books and learning. Samuel was still too young to show clear preferences, but he adored following his father around the ranch. On a warm summer evening when Margaret was 10, James 7, Lily 5, and Samuel 3, the family gathered on the porch after dinner as they often did. The children were playing in the yard, their shouts and laughter floating on the evening air. Vincent sat in his rocking chair with Hannah in the chair beside him, their hands linked between them. "You ever think about that day in Jackson?" Hannah asked quietly. "The day you bought me at auction." "Sometimes," Vincent admitted. "Mostly I think about how close I came to riding past that saloon without stopping. If I had just minded my own business and kept traveling, I never would have met you, never would have had any of this." Hannah squeezed his hand. "I think about it too. I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. I couldn't see any way out, any hope for the future. And then you appeared like something out of a story and changed everything." "We changed everything together," Vincent said. "I gave you your freedom, but you gave me back my life. You gave me reasons to build and plan and dream again. You gave me love and family and a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and gold. Margaret was showing James how to braid grass into a rope. Lily was picking wildflowers, creating a bouquet. Samuel was chasing a butterfly, his chubby legs pumping with determination. "I hope they never know real hardship," Hannah said softly. "I hope they grow up safe and loved and never have to experience the kind of desperation we both knew." "They won't," Vincent promised. "We've built something solid here, something that will last. They'll have opportunities and choices that neither of us had at their age. They'll be able to become whatever they want to be." Hannah thought about the school teacher she had been in Jackson, alone and struggling, betrayed by the father who should have protected her. She thought about the terrified woman on that auction platform, certain she was about to be sold into a nightmare. That Hannah seemed like a different person now, someone from another lifetime. The Hannah who sat on this porch was loved beyond measure by a good man who had proven his devotion every single day for over a decade. She was the mother of 4 beautiful children who would never doubt that they were cherished. She was a respected teacher who made a difference in her community. She was a partner in a successful ranch, a landowner, a woman of means and purpose. And it all started because a cowboy with a haunted past had heard about an auction and decided he could not walk away. Because he had paid $2,000 and declared that her father's debt died that day. Because he had seen her not as property to be purchased, but as a person deserving of dignity and freedom. "I love you," Hannah said, the words inadequate for the depth of feeling in her heart. "I love you too," Vincent replied, pulling her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "Every day for the rest of my life, I'll be grateful that I walked into that saloon." Margaret came running up to the porch, her face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Mama, come see the rabbit burrow James found. There are babies in it." Vincent and Hannah exchanged amused glances, then stood to follow their daughter. As they walked hand in hand across the yard, surrounded by their children's excitement, Hannah felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. This was what happiness looked like. This was what love built when given the chance to grow. The years continued to pass in the sweet rhythm of family life and hard work. The children grew and changed, developing their own personalities and dreams. The ranch prospered even in difficult years because Vincent was a skilled rancher, and Hannah was excellent with the accounts and planning. The school continued to serve the valley, and Hannah trained several young women to eventually take over teaching duties as her own children required more of her time. When Margaret was 16, a young rancher's son named William began courting her with Vincent's permission. Vincent was protective of his eldest daughter, but recognized that William was a good young man from a solid family. Hannah watched her daughter fall in love with a mixture of joy and bittersweet nostalgia, remembering her own unexpected romance with Vincent. The wedding took place on the ranch in the summer of 1893, 10 years after Vincent had bought Hannah's freedom in that Jackson saloon. It was a beautiful celebration with people coming from all over the valley to wish the young couple well. As Vincent walked Margaret down the aisle, Hannah saw tears in his eyes and knew he was thinking of his sister, the first Margaret, and wishing she could be there to see this day. After Margaret moved to her husband's ranch, the O'Sullivan house felt strangely empty despite still having 3 children at home. But life continued its forward motion. James began taking on more responsibilities around the ranch, clearly preparing to eventually take over from his father. Lily announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother. Samuel, now 10, was passionate about horses and showed real talent for training them. One autumn evening, after the children were in bed, Vincent and Hannah sat on the porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. They were both in their 40s now, no longer the young people who had met in such dramatic circumstances. Vincent's dark hair was threaded with silver, and Hannah had laugh lines around her eyes. But they were still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. "Do you have any regrets?" Hannah asked, a question that had been on her mind lately. Vincent considered carefully before answering. "I regret that I couldn't save my sister Margaret. I'll always carry that with me. But I don't regret anything that happened after I met you. Every choice I made, every path I took with you by my side, those were all exactly right. Even spending $2,000 on a woman you didn't know, especially that," Vincent said firmly. "Best investment I ever made. I got a wife, a family, a life worth living. I'd pay twice that and consider it a bargain." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "I regret that my relationship with my father ended the way it did. I wish he could have overcome his demons, could have been part of our children's lives. But I don't regret anything that came after you spoke those words in that saloon. His debt dies here today. You freed me in more ways than you could have known." They sat together as the stars came out one by one in the vast Idaho sky. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied softly. In the house behind them, their children slept safe and warm. The life they had built together surrounded them like a warm embrace. "I used to wonder what my life would have been like if I had just taken that money you gave me and gotten on the stage to Cheyenne," Hannah mused. "Would I have found work? Would I have eventually married someone else? Would I have been happy? And now I know that everything happened exactly as it was meant to. If I had gone to Cheyenne, I would have missed out on the greatest adventure of my life. I would have missed you, our children, this ranch, everything that makes my life meaningful. I was meant to be right here with you." Vincent pulled her closer, and they watched the moon rise over the mountains together. They had been through so much, survived hardship and loss, built something beautiful from the ashes of their broken pasts. And they had done it together, partners and lovers and best friends. The years rolled on, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows as all lives do. Margaret gave them 3 grandchildren, and James married a rancher's daughter and gave them 2 more. Lily went to teacher's college and returned to take over the Valley School when Hannah finally retired. Samuel started his own horse breeding operation on a piece of land Vincent helped him purchase. Vincent and Hannah grew old together, their hair going gray, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They were fixtures in the valley, respected and beloved by everyone who knew them. People told their story in hushed, romantic tones. The tale of how Vincent O'Sullivan had bought his wife at an auction and declared her father's debt settled. How they had built a ranch and a family from nothing but determination and love. On a spring morning in 1915, Vincent O'Sullivan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 60. He was buried on the ranch he had built, on a hillside with a view of the mountains he had loved. Hannah stood at his grave surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her heart breaking even as she felt grateful for the 52 years they had shared. She lived another 5 years after Vincent's death, spending her time with her family and tending the flowers around the ranch house. She told stories to her grandchildren about the Wild West days, about their grandfather's kindness and courage, about the day he saved her, and how their love had bloomed in the wilderness. On her deathbed at the age of 74, surrounded by the children and grandchildren who loved her, Hannah's last words were about Vincent. "Tell him I'm coming," she whispered. "Tell him his debt is paid and we're both free now." She was buried next to Vincent on that hillside, and her children placed wildflowers all around the graves, remembering the story of Margaret who had loved flowers, and the love that had grown from tragedy into something beautiful and lasting. The ranch continued on through the generations, passed down through James and then to his children. The story of Vincent and Hannah O'Sullivan became family legend, told and retold until it took on almost mythical proportions. But at its core, it remained what it had always been, a true story of courage and compassion and the transformative power of love. In Jackson, Wyoming, the Silver Dollar Saloon where Hannah had been auctioned eventually burned down and was never rebuilt. The town grew and changed, and eventually, no one remembered the terrible practice of selling people to settle debts. But in Salmon Valley, Idaho, the name O'Sullivan remained synonymous with honor and integrity, a legacy built on the foundation of one man's decision to pay for a stranger's freedom and one woman's courage to build a new life. And on that hillside where Vincent and Hannah rested side by side, wildflowers grew thick every spring, fed by the mountain streams and warmed by the Idaho sun. Visitors to the graves always remarked on how the flowers seemed to bloom more abundantly there than anywhere else in the valley. as if the love that had been planted in that soil continued to flourish long after the lovers themselves had gone. Their great-great-grandchildren still ranch that land today, still tell the story of their ancestors who fell in love in the Wild West. They speak of Vincent, who paid $2,000 to free a woman he didn't know, who declared that her father's debt died that day. They speak of Hannah, who was brave enough to trust a stranger, to build a life in the wilderness, to love with her whole heart despite having every reason to be afraid. And always, the story ends the same way, with two people who found each other in the darkest moment, who chose love over fear, who built a legacy that outlasted them by generations, with a cowboy who saw injustice and could not walk away, with a woman who was offered freedom and chose to use it to create something beautiful, with a love story that began in a Jackson saloon and bloomed into something that would echo through time, a testament to the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that real love, true love, can redeem even the darkest past and build the brightest future.